All right, so now we are going to kind of combine the ideas of that are behind social studies and science, so we can kind of look at these frameworks and see what is happening here. So to get a big picture of what's happening K-12, we are starting with the integration of science and social science. These two content areas are going to be woven together with a common storyline if it applies. So as we talked about in the previous video, sometimes the science and social sciences live separately and sometimes they live together in integration. And we are creating teacher created units of study. So we're working with all of you to create these units of study to make it applicable to what you're working on in the classrooms and make it very relevant. As we move up to the junior high level, the contents are separated by nature because science is taught in isolation as well as social science. They're still incorporating the ELA pieces and having that be an integration focus for them. But the storylines have separated and they're becoming in their two separate content areas. Their focus is on concept-driven instruction. And a little bit of that is happening at the elementary level as well, but it's very heavy concept-driven in the junior high levels. As we move on to the highest level, the high school, they are working on another element, and especially in science, they have a whole other added piece, which is the essential standards. So they have their regular standards, and then they are introducing an additional layer of standards with the essential standards. And we are redesigning the investigative science course to breathe life into some of those students who maybe are not motivated to continue on in the world of science, and we are trying to remotivate them and get them hooked again so that we can get them to the highest levels of science possible. We want students taking those physics 2 classes so that we can really have more of a STEM focus in the workforce and in higher ed. For the majority, there is minimal changes in content, but a majority of change is happening in the instructional practices. That's very prominent at the high school level. Social science looks a little bit different because all of the strands of social science are supposed to be woven into each course. So high school, the major shift for them though is on how they're teaching, not necessarily what they're teaching. So when we look at the frameworks, when we're talking about frameworks, this is where this research was pulled from. So we've got the C3 framework. The three C's are college, career, and civics. So when you hear people say C3, that is what they mean. They mean college, career, and civics framework, which social science is based upon. And for science, the three-dimensional framework, which was based off of the K-12 Science for Education framework in the science world. And those three dimensions consist of the science and engineering practices, the cross-cutting concepts, and the core ideas, which are the content. So let's kind of dig into some of that and see what this looks like further. This is just the basics so that you kind of have an idea of the documents that are shaping some of what we're working on. So for the C3 framework, there are 4 essential dimensions. So the majority of these, that's called an inquiry arc. So the focus for social science is on inquiry and really having students dig into multiple sources of information and to really start questioning and looking at taking informed action and how do we communicate that and where does change happen. So there are so many really cool things with social science. Now when the teachers were working on the standards and really driving what that looked like, they really took into consideration that they wanted to get away from the idea of having all of those performance objectives that drive what a teacher does. They wanted it to be able to be integrated into multiple content areas and for students to get a deeper look, not a surface level look at the world around us and the way that people are organized and societies are organized and all of the pieces that fit into social science, but they really wanted to be able to tackle those issues in a more deep manner. So previously in social studies, we had 5 strands with at least 10 performance objectives under each one. That's a minimum. Sometimes grade levels had upward of 100 standards that they were supposed to cover in a content area. The social science is going much deeper and broad, and we're kind of cycling through and using inquiry as the main piece of the framework. So the storylines and the content focus looks a little bit different. So as you can see with these arrows shifting, the storyline focus for every grade level, it starts out really small and narrow, children as citizens, and it continues to build. So you can see first grade is communities, living and working together. Then you can see for second grade is the world around me. So the kids really understanding their own world and what that means. A big shift here is it going to third grade is now covering Arizona. To follow the storyline to make it fit and flow correctly, third grade took on the Arizona. And then fourth grade is looking at regions and cultures of the Americas. So that was a little bit of that was covered in fifth grade. And fifth grade is primarily focused on the United States, the U.S. history, but it starts with the American Revolution and builds all the way up to industrialism. So that's a shift there as well. Then sixth grade continues with the global studies, and seventh and eighth grade is more of the integrated global studies, and then we're looking at citizenship at the eighth grade level and more of a civic engagement. But again, all of these pieces are very woven and they build upon each other. So when we're looking here, it is so important that we don't skip what we're supposed to teach in these content areas because they build upon it itself, and they have great impacts on what that looks like at every grade level. So you can see the shifting on the right, the grid. The increase in color saturation means that it's being covered at a deeper level as it builds upon itself. So as you can see, all of these components and standards are addressed, and at the grade levels it really has an increase. And so in order to help students build their knowledge, they need to be covered at the levels that they're required to be covered at. So when we're looking at what the C3 framework encompasses, it is these 5 anchor standards. So skills and processes, civics, economics, geography, and history. And those are all interwoven through the storyline. And the cool thing is that when we're looking at creating our units, we're with embedding these in with the sciences, the skills and the processes is such a neat focus that hasn't been there primarily in the past. And so adding this new level of how we teach kids and the methods and the strategies that we give them is all part of these standards. And we really love that. So here's a graphic, and your facilitator today will be passing out these graphics so that you can get a closer look. But this shows all of the big shifts, and I know the one that really hits us is the Arizona studies moving from fourth grade to third grade, and then a little bit of a few pieces moving from fifth grade to fourth grade. So like colonial America, that is now going to fourth grade. So our hope is that we would have teams at our schools that would work with each other so that you can help support with this shift, because a third grade teacher has not really been studying Arizona studies, and so they maybe need a little bit of support, and we're hoping that we can kind of build a little bit of that communication and collaboration at the site level. All right, so when we look at the science frameworks, the three-dimensional instruction framework, we move from really talking about science a lot, reading about science, telling kids, giving kids information, and then a little bit of practicing what that information does, right? So we are mostly in a society where we do a lot of reading, and maybe the teacher is lecturing and talking about these concepts, and then we maybe do a little bit of a canned experiment or something, and that's kind of how science has been taught historically in the United States. Well, with this framework, we're moving to more of a balanced framework. So we have more of a shift in instruction, and it looks a little bit different. So we have an equal balance of doing science and learning about science and understanding how science works, and looking at the concepts that connect science. And we're actually going to use these cross-cutting concepts to weave together our content with social studies and science. So that the yellow box is actually the core ideas, which is the content. And those are all interwoven together and connected in a way that makes inquiry-based instruction quite fun and exciting and not as messy as we might think it is. So as I showed you some of the standards for social science, these are the core ideas for science. And so there are 10 core ideas. We've got 4 physical science, 2 earth and space, and 4 life science. So these are woven through all of the grade levels. Everyone has some combination of these standards, and then underneath we have a grade level appropriate standard that fits underneath that core idea. And we'll be digging into that later today, and really starting to understand what those standards are. And the importance, as you can see here, is that again, that it is gone through across all of the grade bands until we get to high school, where we have saturation, where we're hoping that they have a very strong understanding of this core idea. So these are the knowing science standards and what that looks like. So the next piece here is the using science standards. So I'm going to go back really quick. These are the content pieces. And again, in every grade level, they have a different variation of these standards that you'll look at in a little while, to help us reach mastery at high school level. These are the using science standards. So we have phenomena, which is an inquiry method of hooking kids and engaging kids to better understand our world. Phenomena exists in social science, it exists in science, it exists all over in our world. The U2 is an engineering focus. So that is showing, when you see a U2 in a standard, that kind of works through that it's an engineering standard, and students are going to be using engineering skills to solve or create a solution to a problem. And then the U3 is the highest level, and that is the ethical, social, economic, and political implications, positive and negative. So it's really a very high level skill of having kids look at what they're learning about and kind of understand the other side of the coin, and looking at it from a different lens, and how some of these pieces of what we're studying affect the greater good of the society. So what this really means is, an overall piece is that our primary shift is from teacher-led to more of a balance. So more reading, more writing, more hands-on inquiry-based lessons. And again, we're going to provide this information for you, help walk you through it. But it really is a shift in practice. So the content, maybe there's a little bit shift here, a little bit of shift there, but for the most part, our primary shift and our change comes from, we're no longer teacher, sage on the stage, stand and deliver. We are flipping the script, and we are having student-led discussions, student questioning, and all of those pieces come from teacher becoming a facilitator.